The playoffs this year have honestly been successfully providing tremendous entertainment on a nightly basis, with almost every series coming down to the wire in some hard-fought battles. We have a few teams that have already stamped their tickets to the next round, while others are still ongoing, but for the teams that have been eliminated already, they've now got some big decisions ahead of them, and that's especially the case for the Los Angeles Clippers. In this video, we're going to be discussing the current predicament that the Clippers find themselves in after losing to the Phoenix Suns in the first round of the playoffs, and I'll tell you what, it's not a good one. We'll break down everything that led to this point, why their current situation is as bad as I perceive it to be, and what they could possibly do next to try to right the ship. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but it also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. As I mentioned in the intro, the Clippers season just ended way before they would have liked, and honestly, it's much earlier than anyone would have expected prior to the season starting. The Clippers entered the year with so much optimism for the season, and honestly, it was for good reason. They had the star power, they made moves in the offseason to directly address their biggest needs, and on paper, they had an incredibly deep team filled with capable contributors at every position. If you were to ask 100 random, unbiased NBA fans before the year who they thought was going to win the Western Conference before the season began, I guarantee the Clippers would have been one of the most popular answers. So the fact that the current state of the team is doom and gloom right now says a lot. I still remember where I was the day that it got announced that Kawhi Leonard and Paul George were teaming up in LA. I was flying on a plane when it happened, and when the plane landed and I regained internet connection, my phone was buzzing with notifications from Woj and Shams about how Kawhi finally made a free agency decision, and it was immediately followed up with news about how the team was also conducting a blockbuster deal to acquire Paul George from the Thunder. Needless to say, that was a lot of information to process all at once, and my immediate thoughts were, oh great, the Warriors super team is finally coming to an end, and here we have yet another super team to replace them. If you would have told me in that moment that not only would this Clippers group win 0 rings together 4 years later, but that they wouldn't even have a single finals appearance with each other 4 years later, I would have called you a liar, because the talent level of these rosters have been as good as anyone around them. You also have to keep in mind that this all went down the year after Kawhi Leonard had just had one of the greatest playoff runs in recent history, leading the Raptors to the 2019 title, so expectations were through the roof. The only question that remains is, how did we get to this point? Well, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is that they've dealt with a ton of bad injury luck at the worst possible times, but obviously there's much more that goes into it than that, which is what I'm here to discuss in further detail. I'll start with the on-the-court side of things, and then after I'll get into some of the off-the-court issues that also definitely need to be taken into account. When the team first came together, they were loaded in so many different areas. Kawhi and Paul George were big-time shot makers who were also stout defenders. Patrick Beverley was also in the mix, helping them lock down on defense. Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell were two of the best bench players in the league at the time, and Marcus Morris was a 40% shooter from deep that season. The issues though, came from within. If you're trying to win at the highest level in the NBA, you can add as many big names as you want to the depth chart, but the human element of things absolutely comes into play, and if the guys in the locker room aren't on the same page, or they don't get along, or they have any kind of beef, then that can derail everything in a heartbeat, and that's kind of exactly what was going on with this Clippers team. This was the season where the playoffs were played in the bubble, and after the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in the second round, capped off by a disaster-class performance by both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George down the stretch of Game 7, a lot of different stories broke, exposing the internal issues happening behind the scenes. One narrative that had been floating around for a few years at the time was that Kawhi Leonard, despite being a great player, isn't really much of a leader, and that narrative stemmed from his former coach Greg Popovich outright saying exactly that back in 2018. Paul George is the one who tried to step into that leadership role on this Clippers team, but the issue is that his teammates didn't really respect him like that yet, and at times they felt that he was aloof to the reality of his own play, thinking that he was above the rest of the team. This can be summed up by a story that leaked about how when they got eliminated from the bubble playoffs, he gave a big speech about how they need to stick together and come back stronger for a run next year, but that speech was met with a bunch of eye rolls and bewilderment by his teammates. George had several spats with teammates throughout that playoff run. He seemed to lack self-awareness about his own struggles on the floor, and many of his teammates felt that he struggled to take accountability for his own shortcomings. All of this may have happened 3 years ago, but it's very important backstory to set the tone for the remainder of this era of Clippers basketball, which is one that lacks in leadership. The next season, they fired Coach Doc Rivers and brought in Tyronn Lue, and I will say that it did help in that regard to an extent. They finished as the 4 seed in the West the next year, and things were going very well for them in the postseason before the start of their bad luck began. Kawhi Leonard unfortunately tore his ACL against the Jazz in the second round of the playoffs that year, which was an injury that then forced him to miss all of the 2022 season as well. The Clippers did actually end up beating the Jazz and making the conference finals behind some outstanding performances by point guard Reggie Jackson, and that actually brings me to my next point. The point guard position has always been this group's biggest need, and when they got good point guard play, they were at their best. It just happened so infrequently. When you're a team built around wing talent that relies heavily on shot making, the offense can stagnate down the stretch of games when they overly rely on isolation ball and tough shot making. All of the great championship teams have had a player that makes the lives of those around them easier with their passing and playmaking, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a point guard, but with this Clippers team, it does because their wing players do not have that capability. A few recent examples of this are Draymond Green and Steph Curry on the Warriors, LeBron James on the Lakers, Heat and Cavaliers, Kyle Lowry on the Raptors, just to name a few. The Clippers' options have been Reggie Jackson, who had one good playoff run but otherwise was incredibly inconsistent, Patrick Beverley, a well past his prime Rajon Rondo, a well past his prime John Wall, and then this year they had Russell Westbrook. Funnily enough, Russell Westbrook may have actually been the missing piece for them, but then, as I stated, not all of their issues are X's and O's related, and bad luck has continually struck. This postseason, the Clippers were looking deadly early in the series against the Suns. Then it turns out Kawhi Leonard tore his meniscus, yet again holding the Clippers back from playing their best basketball at the end of the season. Meanwhile, Russell Westbrook was fighting tooth and nail to keep games close against a dominant Suns team, and while we're all well aware that the Russell Westbrook experience is going to be a wild ride, he can absolutely still generate offense at a high level, and his passing talent clears any point guard that the Clippers have had on their roster in this era. Additionally, and this is important, Russell Westbrook is an outstanding leader in the locker room, and outside of his stint on the Lakers, where he was scapegoated for everything, his teammates have literally never had a bad thing to say about Russ as a leader in the locker room over the years. He actually could have been their missing piece, but of course when they find it, both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard aren't healthy. To summarize everything here, the Clippers' issues to this point have stemmed from the fact that they lack real leadership in the locker room, they have never really had a point guard on the roster who can consistently provide playmaking for those around them at a high level, and they have had some of the worst injury luck possible. So where do they go from here? Well, that's a loaded question with no easy answer. Almost the entire team is still under contract next season, except for Mason Plumlee and, yes, Russell Westbrook, which sucks because with how well he just played with them, he may have actually earned himself a new contract with a team paying decent money, not max contract money or anything close, but more than the minimum, and unfortunately, the only contracts that the Clippers can afford to hand out right now are minimum contracts, because they're already one of the most expensive payrolls. I don't think they can find what they need in free agency in their price range, so they'll likely have to try to scour the trade market, which then presents a new question. Is it time to abandon the Kawhi Leonard Paul George pairing? I don't think that's a crazy suggestion at this point in time, but I'm already seeing reports saying that the team is still committed to them both, so that may be out of the question. They can still try to swing a trade, but it won't be very easy. To match salaries, they'll likely need to include someone like Marcus Morris or Robert Covington, and they do have one first-round pick available in this year's draft that they could dangle in front of a team, but they don't have another first-round pick until 2027. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And in the Clippers' case, everyone is going to talk about how the Clippers need to make big changes, but it seems like they're ready to run it back, expecting different results. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about the Clippers and their future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.